Hello everyone, my name is Victor. Here is another quick drawing of an urban view. This kind of sketch is a fast genre which currently is most suitable for me and offers small chunks of daily time to nourish my creative self. This is important, especially in the context of my current busy life with a full-time job and two little children at home. When I started painting a few years ago, I used to paint on large canvases with acrylics or oils. Over time, as I had less free time, for the sake of convenience, I switched to smaller formats that would fit in my backpack or my pocket. So I started looking for portable palettes, pocket-size sketchbooks, water brushes, retractable pencils that don't need to be sharpened and to not take an additional sharpener with me. Pens, markers, everything that would allow me to use them conveniently at any time and everywhere, even though I didn't have time to paint in a dedicated studio. I didn't want to blame lack of free time or a proper studio for not getting things done. I have tried out places in my house wherever space permitted and improvised tiny temporary studios. On my working desk at my home, it's been already 1.5 years since I've been working from home due to the pandemic. In the entrance hall of my apartment, in my bedroom, in my kitchen, even in my car. When it's warm outside between spring and fall, I'm setting up a temporary studio on my tiny balcony because there is a lot of natural light that comes from two sides, which is important when filming videos like this. When I'm recording the process of drawing. I tend to draw differently when I'm filming the process. I don't know if I draw better or worse. Sometimes I need to draw in some uncomfortable positions in order to film the videos. On the other hand, I tend to be more organized and have a sense of urgency to fit the whole process in as little as possible time in order to make a shorter, concise video. Long videos might be boring, take more space on the memory drive, then it takes longer to upload them. The thickness of the tip of the drawing instrument influences my style of drawing. When I draw with a tiny, thin pen, I tend to be overly cautious, perfectionist and fearful of mistakes. On the other hand, a thick tip or nib gives me freedom and permission to be courageous, bold, daring, intrepid. I don't worry about mistakes because a bold line is a statement of that moment. It cannot be erased or corrected. I heard many stories about urbanskethcers and their pens. I heard that this kind of pen is a game changer. It is about the Fude fountain pen or a bent nib fountain pen, which I'm using now. I remember using fountain pens when I was a child at school and using them for writing. We were not allowed to use ballpoint pens. I don't know for what reasons. Only fountain pens. I didn't think at that time that I could draw with a fountain pen beside writing. I remember that I had a blue plastic fountain pen with a transparent piston refiller. The ink that I was using was a pale blue ink. Before turning the page, I would use blotting paper to absorb the excess of ink. I remember playing with the blotting paper. I would leave the nib of the fountain pen on the blotting paper, and around the nib a stain would grow. I would watch mesmerized how the stain of ink would grow larger on blotting paper. Then I would write something or would make some marks. I would observe how the fuzzy edges would expand while the ink was finding its way through the fibers of the cellulose. I remember that if I didn't have blotting paper, I would use household paper towels that were used only for festive occasions. Good times. Then I grew up and used fountain pens less and less. Over time, I observed that a fountain pen can be a luxury item made of precious materials, engraved with gilt, decorations, an item that you can give as a present, a jewelry with symbolic value rather than a tool with utilitarian purpose. And those luxury pens might cost you a fortune. In art stores, those kinds of pens are locked in glass cabinets to only look at them. You can't even try them out like other drawing tools without much hassle. Anyway, over time I realized that cheap fountain pens are just as good as expensive ones. Not the cheapest ones, but slightly above those. When I was a little, I associated the use of pens only with writing or doodling. I wasn't aware that they could be used for drawing. Even though the dip pens had been used much earlier than the fountain pens, I discovered them much later in my life. Dip pens or nib pens work like the fountain pens. The ink flows into the metal nib through capillary channels, only that the dip pens have no ink reservoir. So you need to immerse the pen in an ink bottle to continue drawing. The pros of using dip pens are that they are very cheap. You can change the nib and they come in a variety of sizes and shapes. Also, you can use them with a variety of inks that can't be used with fountain pens, such as acrylic inks, India inks. On the other hand, it is harder to use them on location, as you need a horizontal surface to put the bottle of ink on. Also, another disadvantage of using nib pens is that the ink doesn't flow constantly with the same easiness. Sometimes it doesn't flow, or other times the ink comes all of a sudden in one big blob of ink and can ruin your work. Maybe I haven't learned yet how to use them properly. What I like about fountain pens is that the ink flows constantly and you can control it better. Also, in terms of convenience, I prefer fountain pens as they are ready to use, which is important when you don't have much time at your disposal. Also, fountain pens use water-based inks, and after using them, you don't need to clean them. Putting down marks with a fountain pen is like writing calligraphy letters in a foreign language you don't understand, but the visual effect is pleasing to the eye. Sketching with a fountain pen is a playful activity. You don't expect much precision such as from a technical fineliner pen, but the beauty stays in the variation of the line. Thin lines, thick lines, dots are like notes in a musical scale. Scribbling and making notes is almost primal. It is a way of expressing since the early stages of humankind, when people would leave marks on the walls of a cave. Expressing oneself in a visual way is the need to make sense of this life, such as the need to express oneself by verbal or writing meaning. I remember when I was a kid using chunks of charcoal that were remaining in the stove in the winter time, and would draw on the walls of the barn where our animals were living. I had to take care of the animals when my folks were at work. I didn't like cleaning after them. We had chickens, ducks, turkeys, geese, pigs, and cows. The cows required a lot of cleaning. I had to clean the dung after the cows almost daily. I used a shovel to gather all the dung from the floor into a pile. Then with a wheelbarrow I carried it outside. Then I would spread some straws on the floor. So in between, when I was taking breaks, I would scribble with a piece of charcoal or chalk on the walls of the barn. The walls were anyway dirty, so no one was upset if I was drawing on the walls. Also, when I was a kid, I remember that I enjoyed handwriting very much. I didn't find my handwriting very calligraphic, but I enjoyed the process itself. I could consider it almost cathartic. Also, in those times when I was at school, in the 90s, having a personal computer was a luxury that not everyone could afford. I remember when my mom was attending university courses as she went to university when me and my sister were already at school. She borrowed a typewriter to write her papers for university. I asked her if I could help her to transcribe from handwriting to typewriting, and she agreed. I don't remember if I managed to help her, but I enjoyed writing a lot while writing at the typewriter. But I wrote only for a short amount of time when the typewriter was at our home. So I enjoyed handwriting. I remember that I was very much interested in the natural sciences, and to find out and learn more about animals, I went to the public library in our small town and would write down in my notebook from different encyclopedias about exotic and rare animals, and also would draw them in that notebook. What a pity that I lost that notebook. I had a strange dream last night. I dreamt that I took a bunch of small cherry trees and went to plant them next to a pathway near the seaside. I was digging holes and they were collapsing. I was struggling to make proper holes to stick in the trees. The soil was either too sandy or it was on the edge of a cliff, close to the seaside. I was accompanied by many of my relatives and acquaintances. They kept telling me how to dig holes so they wouldn't collapse. Someone took out of their bag a special tool for digging holes, an iron pole with a helicoidal screw at one end and the handles at the other end to rotate it. The soil kept collapsing. I ended up on the roof of a barn that was instable with the risk of falling down from it. Everyone was shouting out that I would keep to the rooftop to not slide down. The rooftop was very shaky. I barely could hold myself on the edges. Someone shouted that would set a fire to get rid of the dry vegetation that was around. The barn got in flames. I jumped to the nearest tree that had thorns and I climbed down. Next, I was on the beach with many of my former working and school colleagues. It was a fair on the beach, like a carnival. Then it was suddenly night, right before the Christmas party at work, where Secret Santa was organized, and I was worried that I didn't buy a present yet, and I didn't know to whom I should get a present. I received as a present a ticket to the opera house. So my dreams end, very vivid and strange. I'm wondering if I had this dream because of my medication that I'm taking now. It has already been 4 or 5 years in a row since I have got this awful allergy to the ragweed pollen that lasts between end of August until September, because during this time of the year this plant that grows everywhere blooms and its pollen causes this allergy. It's a terrible allergy that lasts a few weeks. I'm walking with my eyes glued together, then my nose starts itching and I start sneezing many times. First 2-3 hours in the day are the worst. My nose itches and flows unstoppable. I'm using a lot of paper tissues, making piles of used tissues on my working desk, on the floor. Then all day I'm like in the fog, barely going through my duties. My productivity during this period drops drastically, which bugs me. 2 years ago I went to an allergologist and ran some skin tests to see which substances I am allergic to. It turned out that I had antibodies for dandelion pollen and ragweed pollen. For ragweed I have a titer of 40 times higher than normal value, meaning that the allergy manifests even in absence of causing allergen. In the rest of the year I have symptoms but with milder intensity, especially in cold weather. My allergologist prescribed me Avamis. This is some corticosteroid puff for the nose, eye drops and an oral anti-allergic. So during the high season of ragweed I'm doped with these drugs. I think this is all for today. Thanks for watching and listening. See you next time. Goodbye.